Does the ACC even deserve a spot in the college football playoffs this year? That might seem like a ludicrous question to ask. And it's a power conference we're talking about here. Not only is it a power conference, it's one that has a couple signature victories they can hang their hat on. So it seems kind of insane to be suggesting they might not even deserve a playoff spot this year. But based on what we've seen and what the committee has put out for their initial rankings, I mean, I don't think it's that hot of a take. You look at the top 25, the highest ranked ACC team is Miami at 15th. There's no one really in the at large bid discussion. So instead, you're looking at likely an auto bid from the ACC. Their conference champion will likely get a spot. And so if you're asking the question, does the ACC even deserve a bid? It might seem like something that's contesting the existence of auto bids. But even factoring in the fact that auto bids exist, there's an argument that the ACC doesn't even deserve their conference champion in an auto bid world to get a spot in the playoffs. So let's first talk about the structure of the college football playoff. There is a misunderstanding about this discussion a lot. There are some people that think it is impossible for the ACC to miss the playoffs in this current structure because how they think it works is that the ACC, the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12 each get one auto bid, and then that leaves one auto bid, the fifth one, to go to either the MAC, the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, the CUSA, or the American. That's how a lot of people think, but technically, with the wording, it's actually not that at all. In fact, it's supposed to be, air quotes on supposed, we'll get to that in a second, a little bit more dynamic, where there's actually 5 auto bids that exist in college football, and they can technically go to any conference. It just is the 5 highest ranked conference champions that exist that get those spots. So in any given year, it technically could be SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and then an American Conference champion that gets the 4th one of the top 4 that gets them buys, and then the 5th one goes to the 5th highest ranked conference champ. The SEC, the ACC, the Big 10, and the Big 12, while it's a general consensus, they'll be in that conversation every year. There are no guarantees here. There's no guarantee that they automatically get a spot. You still got to finish as one of the top 5 highest ranked conference champions. So it does raise a bit of an interesting debate here because the ACC is in a position where they might not have one of the top 5 highest ranked conference champions in 2025. So the model is absolutely designed to promote the power conferences. That much is clear. They even went as far as to change the model when one of the power conferences went away. It was a 6+6 model with 6 auto bids carved out for the ACC, Big 10, SEC, Pac-12, and Big 12 to all get one, and then the group of 5 gets the leftovers. And then after the Pac-12 crumbled, they literally changed the wording and changed the criteria to 5+7 to reflect that there's one less power conference now. So there's no even debating that the structure is built for the power conferences. That's why I'm putting the air quotes around. It's supposed to be equal. It's supposed to be dynamic. It's not really supposed to. It's supposed to protect the big conferences with its wording, but it can't always. There are scenarios where they won't have a top 5 highest ranked champion, and that is something that we might run into this season. So let's take a look at that playoff picture and those rankings I was talking about before. Miami, the highest ranked ACC team at 15th. They do have that head-to-head win over Notre Dame, but that's clearly not being respected at this time. And then you look, Georgia Tech at 16, Virginia, Louisville at 19-20. There's just not too many ACC teams that are really pushing the top of this ranking. The only other one ranked is Pitt at 22. So there's some risk here. There's some danger, especially when you see South Florida enter the picture at 24. You wonder how far off James Madison is, a one-loss team from the Sun Belt, from entering the rankings, and it starts to create an interesting discussion when you're talking about those teams. Now, I've heard a lot of people say immediately looking at this that the ACC is completely being disrespected, and they will point to 2 data points. They will say, Florida State beat Alabama at the start of the season. Florida State is mediocre to bad in the ACC. They only have 1 ACC win this year, and they literally beat Alabama, who's probably going to make the SEC title game. They also point to the fact that Miami did, in fact, beat Notre Dame. It was early in the season. It was an upset win, but it is a win nonetheless. The fact that there's no head-to-head being respected is ridiculous in that case. There is some credit to this, and there is some actual substance to this take that the ACC might be getting disrespected. But there's been something very clear that the committee has talked about this season, and that is they are evaluating the teams and not the conferences. So these 2 wins, while great and by ACC teams, they're not looking at the ACC's performance. They're looking at it a team-by-team performance and comparing the teams based on each team's resume, regardless of what conference they're in. So if we look at the numbers and you're wanting to talk about the ACC as a conference and you boil it down by itself, It doesn't look good. The ACC in the non-conference versus power conferences is the worst of all the power conferences this year. Yes, they have those two signature wins I just pointed out, but 4-12 overall. The Big 10, the Big 12, the SEC, they all fared better in the non-conference. And then if you accuse somebody of stacking up on cupcakes, beating up on teams that aren't very good, you look at their non-conference records versus power conference teams that are above 500, and there are some impressive records there by everybody except for the ACC. The ACC's 2-8. Everybody else has decent records against teams that are above 500 in the non-conference. So the ACC at the bottom of the pack there. In fact, the ACC a little bit more comparable to the American than they are to even the Big 12 or the Big 10. And you look at that, the American 6-12 and 2-11 against teams above 500. Yeah, that second record isn't very pretty, but they technically have a better record in the non-conference versus power conferences. So if this model is built to be dynamic, just looking at the conferences and comparing them, the American looks a little bit more impressive than the ACC, which is something I find very interesting. However, as I touched on before, they aren't measuring by conference. They don't look at this and it doesn't mean much to them, at least according to what the committee says. So they look at teams, not conferences. Let's look at the teams that are still contending in the ACC, and at least in this picture in the ACC, you've got Louisville, Pitt, Duke, Miami, SMU, Georgia Tech, and Virginia. And I've sort of broken down some of their non-conference losses and some of their non-conference wins. How sturdy are these resumes? You start with Louisville. They don't really have a notable non-conference victory. However, or a non-conference loss, I should say, because they don't have a non-conference loss. Their non-conference victory is against James Madison. James Madison is in the picture. That is actually relevant because James Madison could end up contending for a playoff spot out of the Sun Belt. Louisville's head-to-head win, that's pretty big. But Pitt, talk about Pitt. They lost to West Virginia. That's a really bad loss. West Virginia is not very good. West Virginia is a below 500 team that will likely miss a bowl game this year, and yet Pitt lost to them in the non-conference. If Pitt is in any way representing the ACC this year, that's bad news. Talk about Duke, one of the favorites to win the conference based on their current positioning. They have 3 non-conference losses, 2 of them to group of 5 teams, if you count UConn as group of 5. UConn and Tulane, and then 1 to Illinois. That's not as bad of a loss, but 3 terrible non-conference losses for Duke. When you're talking about if they represent the ACC, that's really going to hurt them. Miami is the inverse of that. They have 3 fantastic non-conference wins over Notre Dame, over a South Florida team that's now in playoff conversations, and over Florida. There are 2 things working against Miami here. 1, they lost both of those ACC games that will now be held against them in their resume and are considered not great losses to SMU and to Louisville. And the other thing working against Miami is the fact that now they're not likely to win the ACC. And by not winning the ACC, their only hope is an at-large spot where their head-to-head over Notre Dame isn't even being respected right now because of how bad they've looked as a team. And so Miami's chances at making the playoff are like almost worse than Duke's at this point because Miami can't win the ACC title, basically. There's a very slim path, but it would require a lot more chaos down the stretch. We move down the list. SMU's another really rough one. They're in a great position to make the ACC title, but they lost to TCU and Baylor in the non-conference, both teams that are mediocre Big 12 teams. They do have the win over Missouri State, a CUSA contender, but in the grand scheme of things, the committee's not really going to give that much respect or think about that one for much at all. Georgia Tech has the win over Colorado. They have some opportunities upcoming, like Pitt plays Notre Dame and Georgia Tech plays Georgia, but they'll be significant underdogs in those ones. So that's likely to be more losses. So if Georgia Tech's pinned with a loss to Georgia, if Pitt's pinned with a loss to Notre Dame, all of a sudden their resumes hurt a little bit more. Now they've got a chance to improve their status a little bit, but for the most part, a lot of these resumes in critical positions are not in great spots. You talk about Pitt and Duke and SMU. If you're having to do some comparative analysis at the end of the season, that's not ideal. So when you talk about the ACC's path going forward, the teams they want to win the ACC would be a Miami, a team that has a really strong non-conference performance. And then if they won the ACC, you could point to those, and that could really justify a high ranking. Virginia doesn't have any catastrophic non-conference losses, neither does Louisville. If Georgia Tech can beat Georgia and then win, that's huge for them as well. The teams that they don't want to win the ACC would be a team like Pitt. That loss to West Virginia is probably going to lose to Notre Dame this weekend. SMU has the 2 mediocre Big 12 losses. Duke has 3 non-conference losses. And so when we talk about a scenario where the ACC doesn't get a single team in the playoffs, it's a scenario where one of the 3 teams on the left wins. Let's say Duke wins it, 9-4 with non-conference losses to Tulane, to UConn, and the other loss they have to Illinois. if you're measuring up their resume next to a South Florida that is also from the American, Duke has a loss in the American Conference, and South Florida has only 2 losses but also has some really nice non-conference wins, South Florida is probably getting the nod over them. And then if James Madison, a one-loss team, emerges suddenly from the Sun Belt, are we really going to be putting a 9-4 Duke team with 2 Group of 5 losses in over a 12-1 James Madison team with their only loss coming to Louisville? It doesn't seem like it to me. So to me, if Duke wins the ACC, it's likely that we get 2 Group of 5 teams in over the ACC champion, which means no bids for the ACC. SMU, it's a little bit of a different conversation. None of their non-conference losses are catastrophic, but still notable. The losses to TCU and to Baylor, it's going to be a conversation, especially if we're in a similar situation with the Group of 5 representatives that emerge. Pitt maybe less so, but lost to West Virginia, a potential loss to Notre Dame coming up. They would be a 3-loss conference champ if they were to emerge. So just some interesting conversations that could be had if we find ourselves in a position here. To me, really, Duke is the nightmare ACC champ that could knock the ACC out of the playoffs entirely. But let me know down in the comments, is this a scenario that you've thought about? Is this something that you even realized might be possible in the ACC? It's kind of been a bizarre season for this conference, but that's all I got for you guys today. I'm going to do all my picks for the Week 12 games upcoming in a little bit here, but I will link the Discord down in the bio as well. If you guys are wanting to talk college football, hop in there and do all the stuff that happens in the Discord. So I appreciate you guys, as always, for watching, and I will see you guys later this week.